Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. Well, in the next few minutes, we're expecting the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to speak in Ramallah. In his speech, he'll set out why next week he'll ask the UN to recognise Palestine as a state that would include the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem, all land which the Israelis have occupied since 1967. We'll discuss if the request is justified and if it's constructive, bearing in mind the Israelis so clearly oppose it. When he starts talking, of course, we'll hear what Mahmoud Abbas has to say, and then we'll get your reaction. You can tweet us now using the WHYS hashtag, or call us up on country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Well, let me introduce you to our first three guests. Dalia is an Israeli blogger. She joins us from Jerusalem. In Washington, D.C., we have a couple of guests. Rena is an estate agent with an interest in the region, and we're also joined by Heather Hulbert, who runs the National Security Network, which is a civic society group. All three of you, welcome to the programme. Dalia, let me start with you. What's your reaction to this Palestinian push for recognition of Palestine as a state?
I think it's one of the most exciting moments in Palestinian history. I think it's also an opportunity for the Palestinians to realize their national aspirations. And it's also a real change of policy and a change of sort of international identity for the Palestinians too, because up until now, they have largely, in international images, been associated with the violent uprising of the 2000s. Now we see a real, complete change of narrative. This is a nonviolent diplomatic approach that is likely to be backed by massive sort of Arab Spring-inspired protests, and there's an assumption from the Palestinians or a goal that these will be completely nonviolent. And I think this stands to make a real impression in the international community, in the diplomatic community, and amongst the Palestinians themselves. I think it will be a really emotionally charged moment for them.
Heather, are you equally enthused?
Well, as Dalia says, there's some real opportunity here, both to bring the Israeli-Palestinian conflict into the context of the Arab Spring and to do what both Palestinian citizens and Israeli citizens actually say they want, which is to move toward resolving the conflict. But I'm anxious that the emotional charge that Dalia mentions will lead actually to hardening of positions and backward steps rather than progress on both sides. So I think, in a way, what happens in New York is going to be less important than what happens afterward on both sides.
Rena, what about you?
Well, I feel like the American government and the people here believe in the framework of negotiations as a means to resolve the conflict. By the Palestinians going to the UN and strong-arming people in order to get this done is not the appropriate way to handle this. That's what I feel.
Well, Dalia, you've heard two different concerns expressed there by Rena and Heather. What would you like to say to them?
Well, I think actually, as Rena pointed out, this is something that both the Israelis and the Palestinians in some ways have said they agreed on in terms of the ultimate policy here. In other words, Israel has been, both the parties have been negotiating over the years to reach a two-state solution. It's been the defining paradigm of the negotiations for the last almost 20 years. It's been the official policy of Israeli leaders for that entire time as well, including Mr. Netanyahu. So in as much as, this is an opportunity, maybe an opportunity for Palestinians, it's also an opportunity for Israel actually to achieve the borders that it has never really been able to secure in its entire existence. I don't worry that the emotional charge is going to push us towards a hardening of positions, except for maybe the hardening of the two-state position in that sense. And in terms of negotiations, I think everybody would have preferred that this moment would have been accomplished through negotiations, but it's hard to hold out any more hope for negotiations that have gone on tirelessly with endless investment of Israeli and Palestinian diplomatic attention, international attention, the amount of hours, of diplomatic hours that have been poured into this, and creative solutions that have been on the table for years, and compromises, willingness to compromise on both sides, but that just hasn't been able to reach any sort of stability or solution. I think it's really hard to hold out any more hope for that same exact paradigm to keep working.
Heather,
even as President Abbas still says there's a possibility to go back to negotiations, it's hard to imagine the two sides will be able to agree on even how to negotiate.
Well, Heather, I'll give you a chance to respond to Dalia in a moment. Let me remind those of you watching that we're keeping a very close eye on Ramallah, and as soon as Mahmoud Abbas appears to give this speech, we'll, of course, bring it to you here live on BBC World News. Also, if you'd like to phone up and take part in the conversation, the number to call is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Now, let's pull up a message we've spotted by Lucy. She's posting on the Jewish website Forward. She says, "What real harm is there in recognising the national aspirations of our neighbours? How would Palestinian recognition render Israel's borders any more or less defensible?" Heather, maybe you could pick up on that point. Lots of people are saying online, this won't make any difference, even if it does go ahead.
Well, you know, that's actually what I was just going to say in regard to Dalia's point, that the sun will rise the next morning after whatever is voted on at the UN. And both Palestinians and Israelis will still face the same security concerns, the same domestic concerns that they do now. The challenges of negotiation will still also be very much as she laid them out. So the question is, does what happens at the UN make it easier or harder
Heather,
for both sides to come to the negotiating table?
Let me just jump in here, because I think we can take a look at a live feed we've got coming from Ramallah, and there we see Mahmoud Abbas standing up there. Let's see if he's beginning to speak. And as we listen to the band introducing Mahmoud Abbas, it's worth reminding you that as you listen to him, if you want to tweet us your reaction, use the WHYS hashtag, or you can phone us up on country code 44 2070 83 72 72. That's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. And you can use the WHYS hashtag. Let's see if he starts to speak now.
Let's observe a minute silence in the respect for our martyrs. God, the merciful, the compassionate, members of the Executive Committee of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, members of the Central Committee and representative of national factions, ladies and gentlemen, religious clerics and Muslims and clerics, ministers and secretaries, members of the Legislative Council and Executive Council, members of the unions, clubs, civic society and personalities, ladies and gentlemen, governors and municipality leaders, dear friends inside the green line who are amongst us, who have come here today to pledge allegiance to the President, members of trade chambers and universities, editors of newspapers and columnists, members of the camps and committees and supporting committees and businessmen, security chiefs and retired people, military retired and civilian retired people. We welcome all jurists during this meeting. Before the travel of Mr. President to the United Nations and taking with him his trust, the trust of the people in you, Mr. President, and his support for you while you're deploying all your energy and effort to gain our right for a membership of the United Nations. You have faced a number of pressure and threats coming from everywhere, so that you will not materialize this step in our battle and combat. We will not give in, we will not let go, but everybody considers this is an achievement towards exercise of our sovereignty on our land or in our independent state, whose capital is Holy Jerusalem. May God prolong your life and may God assist you in your efforts. And God willing, God will support you for the establishment of our Palestinian state, whose capital is Holy Jerusalem. Ladies and gentlemen, the President addresses you. Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, ladies and gentlemen, sons of our resolute Palestinian people inside the homeland and in diaspora. Today, I would like to express your sincere sentiments on the eve of our departure to the United Nations, where we will submit once again the suffering of our people that has lasted for more than 63 years. Generations after generations has lived under the occupation and in refugee camps, deprived from their homeland or from inside their land and outside their land. Their rights are being abused every day in full light and view of the whole world, of the and the United Nations has set up to protect the rights of the people and to help people for self-determination and to prevent occupation of others with force. The suffering of our people started with the emergence of the United Nations. The United Nations has taken tens, even hundreds of resolutions from Security Council or General Assembly. However, these resolutions have not been implemented. We will be going to the United Nations to ask for a legitimate right, which was to obtain a full membership of the state of Palestine inside this organization. As a Palestinian delegation, we take with us all the suffering and hope of our people to achieve this objective and to end the historic grievances, so that we can enjoy, like the rest of the people on earth, with freedom and independence inside the Palestinian states within 4th of July 1967 borders, whose capital is East Jerusalem. Our sincere continuous efforts to achieve through negotiations a resolution that will put an end to occupation and emerge a Palestinian independent state has reached an impasse, a dead end, due to the policies of the stubborn policies of the Israeli government that reject commitment to a reference of negotiations based on international legitimacy and the agreed and signed accords and agreements with the PLO and continuation of settlement Judaization of Jerusalem by changing the democratic aspect of that city. This will prevent the emergence of two states on the basis of the 67 borders. We will go to the United Nations in the hope that we will gain membership that we aspire. This does not affect in any way the Palestinian Liberation Organization in its capacity as a legitimate and sole representative of our Palestinian people. The PLO will remain and Israel will remain in place until we achieve full independence so that we can be the only and legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. The PLO role will remain until the solution of all the impending issues, including that of refugees, is resolved.
Well, a huge amount to digest as the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas completes his speech explaining why he'll be going to the UN asking for Palestinian statehood. Just a few of the things which leaped out to me. He said, "We're living a nightmare. We've experienced 63 years of massacres." He said he wants to delegitimize the Israeli occupation, not delegitimize Israel. And he repeated several times, "This is our land," as he insisted that any state that's recognized by the UN must be based on the 1967 borders, which include East Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza. Let's bring in several guests to get reaction to what Mahmoud Abbas had to say. In Jerusalem, we have Jalal, who's a Palestinian blogger. We also have Dalia, who's an Israeli blogger. And in Washington, D.C., Rina is joining us too. Jalal, let me start with you. Your reaction?
Well, my reaction is like this speech, there's nothing new. It's always been said that Abbas wants to head to the United Nations to to achieve a state, a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, a legitimate state with all the access to international committees and stuff. Of course, the Israeli wall will be illegal. Again, will be illegal. Israeli settlements will be illegal. Although, like, those have been illegal since a while ago. Like, it's nothing new. Like, this move, I don't believe it's going to bring anything new to the Palestinian people, except maybe they will be able to go to the International Criminal Court to raise lawsuits. But I don't believe it's going to make any difference to Palestinian people, and it's not the move that will benefit the whole of Palestinians in the diaspora and inside Israel and in the West Bank and Gaza itself.
What about you, Dalia?
Well, I do think there were a couple of new things in this speech, although certainly, as Jalal said, not entirely new. But for example, that standing ovation at the end was because President Abbas made a very clear statement that he would be going to the UN Security Council, which up until now, it's been a little bit up in the air as to whether he would go to the Security Council or go to the General Assembly. I think this is a very bold statement, a little bit risky, obviously. There's the threat of the American veto. I also think it's interesting that President Abbas put in something for several audiences in this speech. Again, not entirely new, but there was something for the Israeli Jewish audience, actually several things. The emphasis on peace that he said several times, the emphasis on 1967 borders, although every time he says 63 years of occupation, Israelis get a little nervous, and this clear separation he made between the legitimacy of Israel as a state, but the delegitimization of Israeli policy. And that's something that the American Jewish community and the Israeli community and the Washington community and everybody who follows this is very attuned to that distinction. So I think he put that, he put that in there probably, purposely to emphasize that this is the tone and that this is a move that is designed to further peace. Plus, I think the other interesting emphasis was that he kept talking about entry into the EU and a little less emphasis on state building. Mm-hmm. Personally, I think that he runs a greater risk of not becoming an EU member, but still having a much greater boost to continue the state building that has been started already. And
you're talking about the European Union. I was reading a piece by our correspondent, Wira Davis, on the BBC News website. He was talking about the strategic significance of the EU. We're hoping to speak to Wira a little later in the programme to pick up on that. Rina, in Washington, D.C., what about your reaction to the speech?
Well, if I was just listening to it and didn't have a more better grasp of the information, I would think it sounded great. I mean, he said all the right things to everybody, as Dalia had said. Unfortunately, I don't feel that they're really dealing with the issue. You cannot have, this is not, as Representative Engel from New York said, that this is not land for peace. This is land for nothing. Where is Israel's peace in this? Yes, he mentioned that he wants peace, but he didn't talk about all the issues. If you're going to get a state and then start the negotiations, that's leaving Israel with very little room to negotiate on.
But he was crystal clear, wasn't he? He said the reason negotiations aren't working is because of the stubborn policies of the Israelis. Those were his words.
Yeah, and I would have to disagree with that. The reason Israel has shown its effort, Israel in 2005 left Gaza in the hopes that the Palestinians that lived in Gaza, the 1.5 million Palestinians that were there, would start to form a land and a state of their own and start to build. And instead, Israel saw an increase by 500% of rockets coming into their country. You have suicide bombers still coming in. We saw just a few weeks ago, 8 Israelis were killed by these terrorists who came in through either Gaza and
Well,
possibly...
Rina, as you're talking, I can see Jalal reacting to what you're saying. Jalal, what would you like to say to Rina?
Well, like when Israel left Gaza, the Palestinians elected democratically a government of their own. It was Hamas, of course. Like it was democratically elected. After Hamas was elected, Israel and the United States and the West laid sanctions on Gaza. Like Israel blocked Gaza, a siege of all borders. Nothing came out or into Gaza. What do you expect Gazans to do when you try to overthrow a democratically elected government? I'm sorry, but it's not Gazans to blame for this. It's Israel to blame for the siege that they have laid on Gaza.
I wholeheartedly agree with you that Gazans are not to blame. Hamas is to blame. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They allowed rockets to be fired in. They did fire the rockets. They hide behind in schools and in hospitals when those rockets are going through. You can't, I understand what you're saying, but the point is Hamas is, as according to American government, a terrorist organization. You can't make peace with a terrorist organization. That's like asking America to go, and make friends with Al Qaeda. It's not going to happen. If somebody's out for your destruction, you can't talk to them.
I know, but you can't lay a siege on the Gaza Strip as a whole as well. Like collective punishment, also a kind of illegal action. You cannot collectively punish 1.5 million Palestinians in Gaza. It's just illegal. There has to be action against this siege. Unfortunately, it resorted to violence, but that's the case. Israel needs to lay off the siege first. Then I think it won't have gone to this level.
Well, Jalal and Rina, as you're talking, there's a huge reaction online to what Mahmoud Abbas has had to say. Moy Ilmaz has tweeted using the WHYS hashtag, "What's the point of this state if a Gazan still won't be allowed to travel to the West Bank?" Abinunu, using the hashtag Abbas speech, says, "Will Abbas announce an end to security collaboration with the occupation he claims to oppose?" I don't think so. And Ibn Ezra says, "Who does Abbas speak for? Are the Palestinian people unified behind him?" Well, Jalal, maybe you could respond to that. He is the Palestinian president. He represents the Palestine Liberation Organization. But does he really represent all Palestinians?
True. Currently, Abbas's status is not a legitimate status. His presidential term has already ended a few years ago. The new elected government was overthrown. Palestinians in the diaspora, Palestinians inside Israel, Palestinians in Gaza have not chosen Abbas as the leader. I don't know, but if Palestinians all over the world decided, if there was a referendum held and Palestinians all over the world decided that they want to head the United Nations, I wouldn't have a problem with this. But the problem is the PA is heading on itself. The Abbas and the guys who support him, which are a few in the West Bank, they're heading to the United Nations on themselves. They haven't asked people, 11 million Palestinians in the diaspora, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, refugee camps all over the world, and
Jalal,
inside Israel too.
It's worth adding that if people are watching and they are Palestinian, but outside of the Palestinian territories, you're welcome to call us, as is anyone who's watching World Have Your Say. We're always live here on BBC World News. The number to call is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. We've said goodbye to Rina in Washington, D.C. In a moment, we'll speak to Heather in the same city. I can see calls coming in from Nigeria, Sudan, the UK, Canada, Tunisia, Gambia, Pakistan and Malawi. Do keep those calls coming. If you don't get on air, because I'm afraid not all of you will make it on air, we will put some of the comments that you're ringing in with up on the screen as we talk. Now let's bring in Heather in Washington, D.C. Heather, tell us your reaction to the speech.
So a couple of things that President Abbas said that I think many international viewers might not be aware of. First is the extent to which there's agreement about that the solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is 2 states based on the 1967 borders with some land swaps. And the tragedy here, I think, is that there's great agreement on that, although I think it's also important to say that, as our other guest just said, not all Palestinians and, frankly, not all Israelis sign up to that.
But hold on, Heather, before you carry on, let's be absolutely clear. The Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel tweeted earlier in the week, if the Palestinians independently take blunt, unilateral steps to declare statehood, then all previous agreements are nullified. So to say there's a great deal of agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians after this speech is possibly putting a positive spin on it.
Possibly. But I also think, first, one of the real questions I had about this speech is it seems fairly clear that the move to go to the Security Council will not be successful. And then what happens? And then what do Palestinians think and what do Palestinians do? And what do Israelis think and what do Israelis do? And I didn't hear any of that in the speech. And I think both sides will have the choice after that. Do they walk away from the degree of agreement that does exist, or do they choose to come back and keep trying to work on it and go to negotiations? And that, to me, is really the most important question, is does this action turn out to be a helpful move toward negotiations or away from it? And I think it could still go either way.
Well, if you want to answer Heather's question, wherever you're watching, whether you feel that Mahmoud Abbas's speech is a helpful contribution to resolving the situation between the Palestinians and the Israelis, you can call us up or tweet us, Facebook us, email us or text us. All the details are up on the screen. Those pictures you were seeing while Heather was speaking were of clashes between Palestinians and Israeli security forces earlier today. Now let's bring in Ali. He's a Palestinian who lives in Jordan. Ali, what did you make of the speech? Ali, can you hear me okay? It doesn't sound like we can. We'll try and sort out the sound on Ali. That's a shame. In the meanwhile, let me pull up an email here from Paul. He's from Philadelphia and he's posted on the World Have Your Say page. What about Gaza? It seems to me that the Palestinians need to settle their own differences. Can Hamas really be part of the UN? Well, Jalal spoke about that a little, but Heather, what about your opinion on that? Do you think the Palestinians are unified enough to go to the UN and ask to be recognized as a state?
It's clear that every Palestinian wants recognition as a state. Now, there's important differences on what the state encompasses. As to both Rina and Jalal said, for different reasons, there are huge problems that have to be resolved going forward. I think you can question whether this does this or not, but there's no, every Palestinian wants a state, and we can all acknowledge that without it being a threat to anyone. Now, whether indeed it's legitimate, how you can have full representation of Gaza in negotiations without asking people to sit at the table with terrorists is also a really important question. But it doesn't ultimately take away from the fact that Gazans want a state just as much as people in the West Bank do.
Well, we're talking about Gaza. We're going to go there in a moment. I can see calls coming in from Cameroon, South Korea, Zambia, Ethiopia and Bangladesh. Do keep those calls coming. We'll get some of them on the air in a moment. But let's speak to Samir, who's a blogger in Gaza. Samir, your reaction to Mahmoud Abbas's speech?
Well, I think one of the things he has brought was the matter of negotiations. Abbas is intending to go back to negotiations with Israel. That is very telling. It tells that this step is not going to take us any farther. It's not going to give any change for the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, or in the diaspora. Well, and this is a similar step to what happened in Oslo. I guess it's going to be a semi-Oslo state. We will be going again to the negotiations, which would lead us to nothing but more concessions on the Palestinian side. I mean, the Israelis would not clearly accept any resolution that would grant us the 67 borders. Even they are talking of land swaps and so on. So there's no possibility that the Israelis would actually negotiate even a state on the 67 borders, even if we got the membership in the UN,
So you sound unimpressed. You say this will not further the Palestinian cause. But Jalal, listening to us in Jerusalem, you've also expressed disappointment in this speech. But if Mahmoud Abbas doesn't do this, what would you like to do in its place?
Well, I personally believe I've always been advocating for the one-state solution. I think it's the only rational solution out there. Palestinians don't deserve to live in a tiny bit of their ancestral homeland. They deserve to return to where they have been expelled from years ago. I don't think refugees returning to where they were expelled from once that's going to be to delegitimize the Israeli state. I just believe that Israelis and Palestinians could live in harmony in one state. The one thing is hatred. This two-state solution, this talk that's going on today, it's the talk that actually builds up the hate between the two people. That's the problem. There is an ideology, exclusionary ideology, which wants all Arabs out of Israel, but we can fight that. We can civil movements can fight this racist ideology and eventually achieve one state peace and harmony, of course.
And
Yes.
Jalal, you mentioned Egypt, of course. The relationship between Israel and Egypt and between Israel and Turkey has become more fraught in the past few weeks. Dalia, is that also a concern for you, that Israel's being isolated?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly a concern for Israel. And the question is, who's taking it seriously? It seems like for the last couple of years, Israel just sort of hoped it wouldn't come to this. But over the last few, didn't just start over the last few weeks. Israel has been, these have been brewing diplomatic crises with Israel's allies for the last, I would say, year and a half already.
How Israel goes about resolving that is something that perhaps we could talk about in a bit more detail, because I'm hoping you can come back for World Have Your Say's radio edition, which starts in just over an hour. But to Dalia and all of our other guests, thank you very much indeed for your contributions. If you called up, hopefully I'll speak to you on the radio in a little while. Goodbye.